So, Will, over to you.
Great. Thank you so much, Stephanie. Hi, everyone. My name is Will Harrison. I'm the pro bono coordinator with Maryland Legal Aid. I also want to introduce, for those who haven't met him before, Angus Derbyshire, who's our director of pro bono as well, who's on the call. He's at the PBI conference, as a number of you may be, or your colleagues may be, right? So thanks for being here as well, Angus.
Of course. Thank you, Will. Thank you, everybody, for making time for us. I really appreciate all the work that you do.
Yeah, so we wanted to spend a few minutes today talking about a great resource that allows attorneys not barred in the state of Maryland to have a special authorization to practice alongside a legal services provider. It is Rule 19. It's under Rule 19-218. And Rule 19, I'll get into the details. It's pretty similar for those of you who did clinical work in law school. It falls under the same chapter of the Maryland court rules. And so it's a similar process, whereas instead of the legal clinic at the law school, you're working with a designated legal services provider. And it really helps us to be able to recruit attorneys to help with the work that Maryland Legal Aid does. So I'm going to share our PowerPoint and just talk a little bit about MLA's background, then get into this helpful procedure. Hold on a moment. All right, can everyone see that okay? All right. So a couple of the things we're going to be talking about today. As I mentioned, I just want to give a little background about Maryland Legal Aid and talk about this specific rule, special authorization, and then some of the process that we do internally to make this work best for folks. And we don't want to just limit it to MLA's pro bono opportunities. There are about 50 organizations that are registered with the state who you can work with under the special authorization rule. And I want to make sure that folks get those resources as well, in case there's another organization that you'd really like to volunteer with. And then at the end, we'll have some time for questions as well. All right, so as I mentioned, Maryland Legal Aid, we're the largest provider of free direct legal services in the state of Maryland, funded by the Legal Services Corporation. And we're actually, just by number of attorneys, the third largest law firm in the state of Maryland as well. We have about 13 offices across the entire state. And so as a pro bono partner, we're unique in the sense that we do have staff attorneys. We have a huge number of them in some specific areas. I'll show a slide about those in a minute. But, part of the point is there are so many folks who qualify for our services. The slide here mentions we served over 80,000 low-income Maryland residents last year. But we have to turn away just as many who are maybe just over the income limit for the federal funding that we receive, or we don't have the resources to do that particular subject matter. So the reason this is so important is that there's just so many individuals we are not able to represent. And just to show the wide variety of legal areas that our office works in, I'm just going to show this slide briefly. I know it's pretty big, some small print there, but there's a whole range of areas that we work in. We'd love to work with you in as well, whether that's fighting unlawful evictions, to obtaining unemployment benefits, restoring someone's utilities that have been cut off, or dealing with bankruptcy and other debt. We work in a huge number of civil legal aid areas. And the way that our pro bono office works to supplement that work, is what we're really talking about today. And in 2021, we had nearly 200 pro bono volunteers across the state. And as I mentioned, we have 13 offices. So we have an office in Montgomery County, in PG, in Howard County, and onto the Eastern Shore and the Panhandle, and our largest office in Maryland and Towson as well. So no matter where you live in the state, or you have a colleague who's in the state, we do have a local office where someone could work. And we, of course, have a wide variety of opportunities for volunteers. And often the first question we get for folks, especially if they're out of state, it would be either, how do I get the special authorization? And the other piece is substantive. How do I get that legal training? I'm a contract lawyer, but I've never done an expungement before. Well, we want to assure folks who are interested that we have trainings, we have veteran volunteers who are happy to assist you to learn the ins and outs of how an expungement works, or how to write a demand letter to get a security deposit back, There are lots of opportunities we have. So folks coming in who are interested in volunteering first time can work to get to a comfort level they have to work with our clients on the legal issues that they're facing. All right, and I just wanted to throw a couple things here before I get into the nitty gritty of the rule, is that part of the reason that we're so looking forward to continuing to work with ACC and hopefully with some of you is that in the state of Maryland, based on the studies that we've done, there are about 1.5 attorneys for every 10,000 low-income Maryland residents, which is a huge gap as compared to the general population. And so even with about the 150 staff attorneys we have, that still just is nowhere near enough to serve all of the civil legal needs of Maryland. And that goes for our partner organizations as well that I'll be talking about later. And just why it's so important to have folks who have a civil counsel with them in these, often life-changing situations. And what we've seen as well is that having representation in these civil suits has a huge impact versus someone who is pro se. For instance, in protective order cases that our staff attorneys or potentially volunteers work on, we see that someone who is pro se, who's filing for a protective order, has a success rate of about 32%. And once they have representation from MLA, through a pro bono volunteer, through a staff attorney, that success rate jumps up to 83%. That's a huge disparity, 1/3 up to 5/6, just by having an attorney working with them. And there are different stories, different subject areas, but it's the same over and over again. So that if someone has representation, there's going to be, as all of you know, there's going to be a far better chance of succeeding in what the need that they're facing is, and that's why it's so important. All right, so let's talk about the rule. This is an expungement clinic that we did. Was this PG? Was this Exelon last year, Angus?
Yes, this is 2021. These are volunteers from BG and Exelon.
So one of the ways that we work with volunteers tends to be large-scale clinics. It could be in Baltimore or another area where we bring in. It could be a corporate group. It could be a government group. It could just be a number of our volunteers. We've done alumni. We worked with Loyola and other schools to alumni clinics. Working in the local community, but bringing a group together so you don't just feel, oh, I'm doing this by myself, but you're doing it with the folks you see every day and the attorneys you work with and trust and can work on that together. So talking about this rule specifically, and this is the drier part of the presentation, but really I think what you're here to learn about. It's Rule 19-218, special authorization for out-of-state attorneys affiliated with programs providing legal services to low-income individuals. You can look that up. It's in the Maryland Court Rules. I won't post all the text here, but I want to just get across a couple points about how this rule works. And again, it's very similar to those of you who fell under Rule 19 to work in your law school's legal clinic, perhaps you're in your 3L year. And so a couple of the requirements. The first is that you must be associated with an approved legal services provider designated by the Maryland Legal Services Corporation. There's an official list of right now it's 52 organizations. We'll share that and make sure that Stephanie has that to share out with the attendees today of those organizations. There may be one that's closer to you or closer to a subject area that matters to you. If it's not working with us, we want you to be able to feel comfortable working with them. So we'll make sure that's in the chat and share with folks afterwards what that list is. It can't just be any organization. It has to be approved by the Maryland Legal Services Corporation, who is one of our funders and is funded by the state of Maryland. Then in terms of who's eligible, it's pretty standard. It's pretty simple. Just needs to be a graduate of an ABA approved law school, and they must be practicing under the supervision of a member of the Maryland. Pretty straightforward to other rules that you might have seen. And then with proof of eligibility, what we need to provide to the state, want to work with you on and provide, is evidence of graduation from an ABA approved law school. I'll talk in a bit how we handle that proof. And then a recent certificate from your state's bar or from the highest court in your state certifying that you are a member of good standing. And I want to stress that it's recent. The certificate needs to be Maryland's highest court, now called the Supreme Court, can be a little sticky about this. They want it within 60 days of us submitting this packet for special authorization. And so it needs to be recent, it needs to be within 2 months, a certificate from your state bar that you're in good standing. Probably something you may have had to get before for other services you performed or for your employment. 60 days, that's the rule there. And then the last thing, and again, we're providing this, and I'll talk a minute about how we put this all together and work with you, is a statement from our executive director or the executive director of the organization you're volunteering with, stating that the provider is associated with the attorney. So you need those, some kind of documents filling those things out. And then one other piece I want to touch on that the rule goes into is that it's on the attorney and on the services provider to report any disciplinary matters. So if you are disciplined by your local jurisdiction, it's incumbent on you to report that not only in your local jurisdiction, but to report that to the to MLA or the provider you're working with, and MLA will then report that to the Maryland bar. You don't need to do it directly. The legal services provider you're working with can do so. And one thing before I talk about how MLA handles this is special authorization. Two things that I think two of the most frequently asked questions we get are special authorization is not sort of a yearly, something that needs to be renewed yearly. There is a nominal filing fee, but we cover that when we submit the packet. But this isn't something that has to be re-upped every year. The rule states it's as good for as long as the attorney is associated with the legal services provider. So as long as the executive director has filed that note and has not filed a subsequent note saying the attorney is no longer affiliated with Maryland Legal Aid, it is good. It continues to be good. Now, I do want to stress, and I think this, I think most people would understand this, but I want to be absolutely clear. This does not mean that someone is barred in the state of Maryland and can practice, can give advice to their aunt on a divorce matter. This is specifically for work done in association with Maryland Legal Aid or the other provider that you're doing. Any practice of law outside of that would run afoul of the Maryland bar and your own bars. So I just want to be crystal clear on that. It's specifically about working with the legal services provider and the work that they do. Now, there isn't a subject matter limitation. So as long as the work is with Maryland Legal Aid, you can work in any of those areas and alongside attorneys who work there as well. I'm next going to move on to our process and how we handle this, but I want to open up for any questions. Or Angus, did you have a comment?
Yeah, real quick, there's a question in the chat box.
Oh, sorry, I wasn't. I have my. Yeah, go ahead.
No, you're good. Which I think is a very important. Teresa asked if your status can be inactive. It sounds like the DC bar has indicated you can get a certificate of good standing if inactive. That's not something I've ever come across. My initial thought would be as long as you can get a certificate of good standing, I think you would be okay. But certainly that's something we can get some clarity on and get back to you, Teresa. I probably have to call the Court of Special Appeals here. Just get a little bit of clarity there.
Okay, great. Yeah, I Googled getting a certificate in good standing from the DC bar, but since I've been in-house, my status changed to inactive rather than paying active dues. So I'm just curious, so I'd had to reactivate and become active again.
So there's nothing in the rule itself saying it has to be either active or it just says you have to have a certificate of good standing. So I'd imagine that would be based on the rule of the local jurisdiction. But again, I would like to get a little bit of clarity, and I can contact our Court of Appeals and get that back, get that to you for sure.
Hey, Angus, this is Chris Porter. How are you doing today?
Hey, Chris, doing well, thanks.
Just an FYI, I was in the same spot. I have a DC license that's inactive for the same reason. The good standing cert, and I went through the process, and it did issue me a good standing cert that said it was inactive. But Angus, when I sent it to you, that was not a problem as it related to getting the special status in Maryland. So that was my experience. That was about a year ago.
Thank you, Chris. Teresa, I'll go with that then. If it worked for Chris, then I think we'd be okay.
Thank you.
Okay, great. Thank you. Thank you both.
No problem.
Hi, this is Mary Williams, and I just put another question on the chat. Some of us have LLM degrees from the US, and we have sat for the bar going through the process in mainly New York or DC in various places. The first line item was being from an ADA, the ABA accredited school, but I don't know if that particularly requires a JD or if there's any distinction as to what that is, what the degree is.
Angus, have you come across that before? I haven't seen. There is language in the rule defining state, which would make me think that perhaps it is limited to, ABA schools within a U.S. state or province. Angus, is that something you've encountered?
That's not something I've come across. Certainly something I get a little bit of clarification on. I imagine correct that you are barred. You went through the bar process and are currently barred now.
Correct.
I think if you are currently barred attorney in another jurisdiction, I think it would be okay. But again, I would want to get just a little bit of clarification from the Court of Appeals before submitting the application, and I can find that out.
Thank you.
And can provide proof of your, your degree, along with those two things. Hopefully that would work.
Thank you.
Any other questions? All right, so I'm gonna talk briefly about how we handle this in-house. Each organization who's approved under this rule may handle things a little differently, but we want to just talk about how we try to make it as simple as possible for folks. So what our office or what MLA needs to be provided with is a copy of your resume, a copy of your law school transcript. That's part of the proof of graduation. The certificate of good standing, again, needs to be issued within 60 days by your jurisdiction. And also this social security number. We understand security concerns there, and we're happy our HR department puts together this packet that we then submit to the Maryland Supreme Court for special authorization approval. We are happy to take that information over the phone and in fact to connect you directly with our HR specialist who puts the packets together so that it's never communicated electronically. And this is not information that Angus and I and the pro bono office maintains. This is not, so we may never hear about what the social security number is. We just want to assure you that this is handled by our HR department. The executive director signs a letter, does not see the social security number, but it's part of the application process we handle. So that's what we need for our HR department to put the packet together and to put a letter together that's signed by our executive director. So again, once you've had a conversation with us and it makes sense that you'd like to volunteer at a number of clinics or you're interested in doing some one-on-one representation, we just need a couple of these things I've outlined here and we can start that process. Because it is a process and it can take usually, as you can see on the slide here, as long as a month and there's some paperwork involved. If you're just thinking of doing one clinic with us, it may not make sense to go through this process. But if you think that you'd like to do something continuing or to do multiple clinics, or you'd like to set up something where you're doing direct work with clients in a specific area, then yes, it would of course make sense to get the special authorization with that. As I mentioned, we will compile the paperwork, put together the packet, pay I think it's a $10 filing fee. That's handled all by us, and we will send it, and it takes the state about a month to process it to get the special authorization. One piece given in our new Zoom world is that we've been okay using copies or scans of the certificate of good standing. Previously, the Maryland Special Court of Appeals needed the actual certificate itself on paper. That has not been true since the pandemic. I don't think we've officially heard that that's changing, and we're hopeful that that will continue to be the case since it has been the last 3 years. Just wanted to add the proviso that potentially that could revert back. But for now, we're hopeful that that's the world we're in. Copies of these documents are okay. Any questions there about our process?
Maybe you're going to get to this is Diane, but the I haven't asked for like a transcript or anything like that for quite some time. Is there a particular order that you think we should like start with the transcript? Because that usually takes the longest or something like that.
In my experience, if your school is in connection with I forget the name of them, but it's the database. Most schools upload their system to, I can't remember the provider's name, but if you're reapplying for bar admission, so usually you can process those things quite quickly, unless there's like, in some cases, you had like a book fine, a library fine that wasn't paid, there might be a stop on that. Most schools will have uploaded that to the system. And again, I'm forgetting the name of the provider that does that.
I got you.
So it can go fairly quickly, but yes, I would say of those, that's probably the one that would take.
Okay.
The only piece that's really time sensitive is that certificate of good standing, right? So that's the piece where there's a little bit of timing. And so we've had situations in the past where, say, we got one that was 50 days out, and then I got to get it to my HR department, put an application together, get a mail, and we just kind of missed that window. So that's the only, we just want to make sure people are aware of that kind of that time window for the certificates of good standing. But everything else it should not be time sensitive. If we can gather those first and then request a certificate, we have the time to do that. That works the best.
Okay.
In some of these one and done clinics, sometimes we could have some paralegals as well who are not attorneys, but because they are working with the legal aid societies, lawyers or other lawyers, etc., that they can help. So is there, in other words, is there a process like that in Maryland for one of these in one and done clinics that we wouldn't go through this, but working directly under somebody's guidance that basically we could still help? Or is that not possible at all, that even if we're going to do that, we have to go through this process?
Yes, there is. You can work directly with another volunteer or one of the MLA staff, particularly Angus or myself at the clinic, working alongside them. And so long as Angus or another MLA attorney is the one who's signing off and reviewing the documentation, then yes.
Maryland attorney. Okay, thank you.
Yeah, I think it's a question of kind of what the service that's being provided is, right? And I just want to be careful for you, for your law license, right? And for us, that if you have the special authorization status, then it frees you up to be the one delivering the legal advice or the legal assistance. Where if you don't have that, you can operate kind of in a paralegal capacity, in a supportive capacity. At that point, you're relaying the advice that's coming from another attorney, if that makes sense. And so I just want to be safe with your license, right? I want to be safe with our malpractice issues and make sure everyone's protected. So there are some opportunities to volunteer. There's a lot more limited if you're not licensed to practice in the state of Maryland.
Thank you.
Well, I do want to mention, I think both Will and I have made this mistake. We've talked about the Maryland Court of Appeals and the Maryland Supreme Court. They're the same thing now. Back in November, Maryland decided to change the name of its highest court from the Court of Appeals to the Maryland Supreme Court. Will has picked up on that much faster than I have. So I apologize for some of the change in names back and forth. We're still kind of getting used to that terminology.
Yeah, my wife and I joked when we were looking at the local election issues that our most important one was the initiative to change the name to the Maryland Supreme Court, just because that feels so wrong to say otherwise. I know New York is the big state that doesn't use Supreme Court, but I'm very happy that Maryland made the change, like almost every other state. So, all right, any other questions about our process before I talk a little bit about our opportunities and how we'd love to work with you or your organization? All right. Just want to again go over a couple of the opportunities that we have and that we hope you'll consider taking part in. So one of the main ways, and you've seen pictures of them here in the background here, for instance, are our legal clinics. This is one of the main ways we work with large groups of volunteers. We've worked alongside corporate organizations like Exelon, lawyer alumni associations, government groups to do these events. They can be general legal services clinics. They can be particular areas like our large scale expungement clinics. We have another one of those coming up at the end of March that we'd be happy to talk to you more about. And we do smaller scale clinics as well. Our community lawyering initiative has its Lawyer in the Library programs. Different libraries across the state go to every week or once a month to have a couple of MLA staff and can have pro bono volunteers there as well to talk about any legal issue that someone comes in with. And that can run a wide gamut. So if there's a library in your community where we're already serving, and those are available to find on our website, or where you'd like to start one of these programs, we'd be happy to work with you on that as well. And we've hosted various other clinics on, especially during COVID, on landlord-tenant issues like company security deposit cases. And just a huge number of cases we've received recently are wills and estates, which eventually everyone is going to need some service on at some point. And that's an area where we could really use some volunteer help right now. And then, of course, we have opportunities for direct representation, one-on-one, an area that you feel comfortable with. And, again, I want to stress that we have a number of training opportunities and mentorship opportunities with our veteran pro bono volunteers. At all of these legal clinics as well, we usually have MLA staff attorneys, not just from our pro bono office, but from our community lawyering initiative or other subject matter areas that we have. So we have opportunities to work alongside our staff who are experienced in these matters to bring you up to speed in an area that you feel comfortable working in with our volunteers, with our staff attorneys and with our clients. I'm just going to put these up while we have time for questions. Just a couple of our representative client stories, folks we tend to see. Just some of the basic difficulties that folks who don't have access to an attorney, don't have access to the resources they need and how that can affect them. This is one case of an estate issue that we worked with in the last year. I'm going to have this up. There's one more I'm going to put up after this. I did want to mention again, there are 52 approved legal services providers in the state. Angus, would you be able to drop that into the chat box if you have it?
Yeah, I believe I already did. I think I put it in the chat
Okay.
box along with the rule itself.
Yeah, thank you for doing that. Take a look at those. There are ones in your area. There are some limitations, for instance, on what Maryland Legal Aid can do. For instance, we can't do immigration work because of our funding structure. There are a couple other subject areas that we work in, but can't use volunteers for. For instance, our CINA, which is Children in Need of Assistance, which is guardianship and children's cases. That's something we can't work with volunteers on. But take a look at the diversity, the great group of other organizations in the area. One we closely partner with is the Maryland Volunteer Lawyer Service. In fact, we often will attend each other's events because of conflict issues to work alongside them. So they're another great organization. There are so many on that list. And if it doesn't make sense to volunteer with MLA, we hope that you'll look at that list and find some other an organization that does suit you. Similar, this is another story here. This is a security deposit case that I'll have up here. Another thing to touch on, if your organization, if you're an in-house counsel or you're counsel with a governmental organization, we would love to partner with your organization on doing a clinic with your, with your fellow attorneys in the group. It can often be a great experience to not just to go by yourself, but to go with 10 of your colleagues to do this and to, learn this information together and to go out on whatever day it is with your colleagues, travel there together, group bonding experience, and also fulfills your organization's pro bono needs, your own, that sort of thing. So we're, again, love to partner with you in whatever way makes sense there. And that up. So here's our contact info at the end. Again, I'm Will Harrison. I'm our pro bono coordinator, and Angus Derbyshire, who's our director of pro bono and training, for at least the next week or two. And any other questions before we finish up? I'm happy to stay on. I know the session, we're letting you out a little early here, but we want to hang out and talk about any other questions or concerns that you have while we've got you.
I have one question, one more question. Do you do these clinics always in person, or do you have some opportunities online as well? Because it looks like most of them in Baltimore and in some various locations. I don't know if you have Montgomery County locations as well.
Yeah, during the pandemic, we have done remote clinics virtual ones set up where it can be a number of different setups. But yeah, we have done virtual ones, or if you're talking about outside of Baltimore, it just tends to be that our client base, we get the most cases out of the Baltimore area. But again, we have offices in Montgomery, PG, other parts of the state, and we have done clinics with them as well. Just the most routine ones we have, and the largest ones tend to be closer in Baltimore or around.
Okay, thank you.
I think it's a good opportunity also to plug. We are going to do a virtual clinic with the ACC in May. I think we're still working on a date, but just kind of keep an eye out for that.
Okay, great. Thank you.
One of the things that I think we'll touch on earlier, I just want to kind of reiterate with the other legal service provider. Unfortunately, this Rule 19 status is not an umbrella to practice under every organization. It is, in fact, specific to each organization. So if you got a certificate to practice with us and be limited to marital legal aid, and if you wanted to then go and do work with another organization, you would have to get a separate certificate from that organization. It's a little bit of a complexity in the rule that I don't like, but unfortunately it's one that we do have to kind of deal with.
Yeah, thank you for mentioning that, Angus. I should have brought that up. The rule specifically mentions a few times the executive director of the organization. So technically that is the person who is recommending you to the site. And so that's going to be different for every organization. Any other questions or comments?
I guess so if we're interested in the package, should we let you know ahead of time or just start getting stuff together? And then once we're partly on the way, give you a holler and.
Yeah, I think I would go ahead and start putting some things together first, if that's okay. What some people have done, which is fine, is just kind of submit, the resume and the transcript, and then, hey, I'm waiting on the certificate of good standing. We can go ahead and start kind of putting everything together, and then when the certificate comes, we can submit it right away. But I think if you have like those foundational pieces of it, feel free to kind of send it over, and we can at least start building it. So when the certificate comes, we can submit it quickly. But I probably don't need a whole lot until you have some of those foundational documents ready to go.
Okay, great. And if you guys wouldn't mind me just putting in a plug, the ACC chapter, both Chris Porter and I are on, we just started it's basically a Maryland group to really get more people involved in not only CLE, but obviously pro bono and community service. So anyone on the call that's interested, please feel free to contact me or Chris Porter, and we'd love to have you. We're in the early stages of putting this together and really want to, get some energy behind it.
Is there a minimum time commitment that you're expecting?
It's really a small, it's really just whatever you want to, contribute. Right now, we're just meeting monthly and kind of getting our feet under us. So yeah, it is not a heavy lift at all.
Thank you.
I do want to just expand on one more point. Will mentioned kind of opportunities maybe to build some specific clinics to your group. If your organization is already, say, working with a volunteer group in the community, particularly in PG and Montgomery County, we're always interested in kind of finding new partnerships and new ways to deliver services to our clients. So I'm more than welcome if you have those kind of connections already, and we're interested in kind of doing a clinic for that group. Please feel free to reach out, and we're happy to kind of chat about that and see if something we can make happen. Because we've had a lot of success kind of doing it that way, but with some of the organizations.
And similarly, if one of those organizations or some group that you're associated with has could be a health fair, career fair, community fair of some kind, it would make sense for MLA to either have a table to talk about services, or we could even attach a clinic to it. We'd love to work on that. Our best attended clinics tend to be attached with a community fair of some kind. We did one with Columbia Community College last month. We're doing one next month with the Baltimore Healthy Expo in the Convention Center, and that's going to be one of our largest attended ones. And so those synergies there, and having a trusted group in the community and providing other services as well, health screenings, food drives, great synergy there.
All right. Well, if there is no other questions, Thank you all so much for attending. Thank you, Will and Angus, for the information and participating with us. Again, as Angus mentioned, we're going to have an ACC NCR clinic with Maryland Legal Aid that will be virtual, so be on the lookout for that. And also we're going to have a program in Maryland, as Diane mentioned, sponsored by our Maryland advisory group. That'll be in Rockville, so if you are located in near that area, stay tuned for an invite on that. And with that, we'll conclude today's program. Thank you all.
Thank
Thank
you.
you so